Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to TPM. For today's video, we're going to talk about some reloading stuff again. So we're going to go back to the videos we did last month and kind of elaborate on a couple topics that we glossed over in the reloading videos. So today we're going to talk about how to find the jump distance for your particular rifle. So this is a super critical measurement that we need to know how to get accurately in order to make the best ammo that we can for our rifle and kind of understand what's going on with our reloads. So there's three methods that I have used in the past, and there's one method that I primarily use now. So what we'll do in the next few minutes is just run through each of those methods, give some of the pros and cons, and show you how to do it. All right, here we have all our stuff laid out. And before we get into this, let's talk a little bit about jump distance, what it is, and why we need to know how to find it. So first off, in the most basic sense, jump distance is the distance this bullet has to travel before it engages in the rifling. So before this bullet actually engages in the lands and grooves, there is a dead space called the throat, and that's what we're measuring and that's what we're finding out. So why do we need to know this now? First off, in my opinion, one of the most important reasons is this is a great way to fine-tune the accuracy of your hand loads. So this is actually the final step that I use in all of my load development, and this is how I fine-tune the hand loads for the best accuracy that I can get. Generally, I'll play with jump distances from 0, so that's the bullet right at the lands where it's going to contact, and all the way back to 50 to 60 thousandths off the lands, which isn't a great amount, but it does make a huge difference. And a lot of times, I'll shoot in groups of 10 thousandths increments, so I'd go 0 thousandths at the lands, then 10 thousandths off, and 20 thousandths off, and so on and so forth. And I'll shoot groups of 3 and just kind of see how the rifle reacts and the groups react to having a little bit more or less jump. And real quick, one other nice reason to figure out the jump distance for your particular rifle and reloads is you want to make sure that you're far enough off of the lands to where you're not going to stick a bullet in the lands and grooves, and if you have to eject a live round, you don't pull the bullet out of the case. So doing this is actually a common practice in bench rest where people will seat bullets soft, meaning there's very little neck tension on the bullet, and they'll seat them long, so when they engage the bullet in the chamber and push it forward with the bolt, it actually seats itself into the case and creates its own jump distance, which would be theoretically 0 at that point, but they have a very specific way of doing this that I'm not very familiar with. Most of the time we're off the lands, so that's the safe place. However, if we shoot too far off the lands, and you could sink the bullet too far into the case and create some pressure issues if you're compressing powder or other things like that. So all these things need to be considered when we're reloading precision rifle ammo like this. All right, guys, so here we have all our stuff, and we're going to jump into this right now, and I'll go over each of these 3 different methods of finding your jump distance. And like I said, these are all ones that I have used in the past and experimented with, and I've kind of come upon my final way of doing this using this Sinclair seating depth gauge, but all 3 of these are viable ways to figure out your jump distance. So don't be afraid to use these ways instead of going out and buying a tool. Not that this is overly expensive, but if you want to keep it simple and do it this way, perfectly fine. So we'll go over the most simple way, in my opinion, of doing this. So all you're going to need for this is a fired case and the bullet that you're going to shoot. So this is a fired 6mm case out of this rifle. So theoretically, the outside case dimensions now should resemble what's inside the chamber. They should be very close. Probably not exact because there's a little spring back, but very, very close. So then this case has not been sized. The spent primer is still in the back of it. All I did was run a 6mm expanding reamer or expanding mandrel down the neck just to make sure that there's no dents or dings and I have nice even tension on the bullet. So what we're going to do here is take our bullet that we're going to load. This is a 115 grain 6mm DTAC, and we're going to put it in the neck. So as you can see, with just finger pressure, I can move the bullet up and down pretty easily, but the bullet stays in place, so it has just enough tension on it. That's exactly what we want. So how we start this out is you want to bring your bullet out just an obnoxious distance like that, something that would be totally unreasonable for most rifles. And then we're going to chamber it. And just remember to use a spent case in this so we're not dealing with live primers or anything like that. And you want to carefully insert it in the chamber. Then I'll run the bolt home nice and smoothly. And what's happening right now is it's pushing the bullet back in the case as it's contacted the lands and grooves. So after we seat the bolt, slowly eject your round And if you have an ejector that's really strong like this one, and it puts a lot of side pressure on the case when it's coming out, use your finger to relieve the pressure so it doesn't change the dimension at all. So there we have it. So now, in theory, this bullet should be seated right at the lands and grooves. So we'll take a measurement on it, and for some reason my caliper's in millimeters, so we'll switch that back to American, and we'll make sure they're zeroed out. And this is just a standard Sinclair comparator with a 6mm insert right here. So we will carefully put our 6mm bullet in the comparator insert, run the calipers home, and we get 2 inches, 149 thousandths. So 21495. So we'll record this and we'll compare all 3 dimensions that we get after we're done. All right, guys, here we are with method number 2. So for this, all we need is a nice Sharpie, a fired case that's been body sized and neck sized. You can get away with just neck sizing if you want. And then we need the bullet that we're going to reload. So as far as neck tension goes, if you normally load 1.5 to 2 thousandths of neck tension, for this test you want to bump that up to 3 to 4 thousandths of an inch neck tension. So the reason being, we don't want the bullet to move when we're going to conduct the test, and you'll see why in a second. So one thing we have to figure out before we start is we have to figure out an initial starting point for our seating length. So what I'll usually do is, if I don't have any data on this barrel other than just the chamber reamer specs, I'll go pick a piece of factory ammo. So this is 6 Creedmoor, get a piece of Hornady 6 Creedmoor, and measure the overall length and go maybe 150 to 200 thousandths longer than that, and that'll be a rough starting point. So if you don't have anywhere else to go, that's what we'll look for. So first step, we need to mark the ogive of the bullet. Now the ogive is the part of the bullet profile where the bullet radius of the tip area is transitioning into the straight that goes into the neck of the cartridge case. So we have a couple different bullet profiles out there. We have secant ogive bullets, we have tangent ogive bullets, and we have hybrid ogive bullets, and they all have a different profile where they contact the lands and grooves. So once we have this all marked up, we have a nice even Sharpie mark around our ogive. We're going to chamber it up. All right, and as we're closing the bolt, pay attention to how it feels. If there's a lot of resistance, like this, there's quite a bit of resistance on there. The bolt started to close, but there's no need to go any further. So we'll just extract it. Come out of there. All right. And we have really, really nice impressions in the Sharpie marking of where the lands are. So they're right where we figured they would be. Now where to go from here? So we need to take our calipers, and this is how I do it. And this is not the best way or the way, it's just a way. So we'll take the calipers and just use the normal end, and we'll go just roughly eyeball with the calipers over the little impressions in the Sharpie marker, and I'm getting about 54 thousandths of an inch. So next step is we got to seat the bullet a little deeper and retest. So I'll go back to the reloading press right now, and I'll probably seat it maybe 20 thousandths deeper. We don't want to go the full shot on the first time, because chances are you'll overshoot your dimension and you'll have to restart the test. So just go little bits at a time, and this is a little tedious, but it'll get you the best results. So we'll be right back. All right, guys, back from the reloading press, and I seated the bullet about 20 thousandths deeper into the case. So having micrometer seating dies in general is just a really, really nice luxury item to have for your reloading collection. So you want 25 thousandths, just move the top of the micrometer down 25 thousandths and you'll seat the bullet that much deeper. So back to our topic. Now we have our bullet seated deeper, and we need to re-Sharpie the ogive, and we'll rechamber and see where we are at. All right, so make sure that's nice and dry. All right, so 25 thousandths deeper. That closes just nice. All right. All right, so we still have some very, very faint markings on the ogive. So I would say probably, I don't know, probably another 30 thousandths off or so. But we use our calipers and kind of roughly estimate where we are at. All right, so through the calipers, it looks like about 37 thousandths. So we'll go another 10 or 15 and we'll retry it. So be right back. All right, back from the reloading bench again. And I went ahead and seeded another 15 thousandths into the case. So we'll go ahead and Sharpie it up. You can move in even finer increments than this. If you want to go 5 thousandths each time, if you want to do this right next to your reloading press, it's pretty simple to do and it doesn't take a whole lot of time. You get pretty accurate results that way. So another 15, so 15 plus 25. So we're 40 thousandths down from where we started. So we'll chamber this one up. Slippery. All right, feels good. And you probably won't be able to see this on the camera, but there are some very, very faint little witness marks from the lands in there. Very, very faint. So that tells me we're getting close, probably within 10 to 20 thousandths of an inch. And this method is not as exact as even the one where we just push the bullet into the case, but it's a good starting point and it's good to use in conjunction with other tools to determine your overall length for your reloads. So we'll go ahead and take another 10 or 15 off this and we'll recheck it one more time. All right, back from the reloading press one last time. And we'll go ahead and re-Sharpie. And this time should do it. We should be pretty close. All right, let's chamber this one up, see where we're at. So I took another 15 off of the overall length. So it seemed like the marks were, I don't know, maybe 10 to 15 thousandths of an inch. So it might be a little low, but we'll check soon. So now there's no marks on this at all. So there's no contact with the rifling. All right, so we're either at our point or we're past it. Either way, we'll figure it out in a second. So looks like we're measuring in at 2-inch 1/360. So I'll write that down here. So compared to our first method, 2-inch 1/495, and now we're at 2-inch 1/360. So we're a little bit off from that, and I would tend to trust the first method over this one. But if I was doing it with just these tools that we have here, then I'd probably do both of them and compare the results and determine an overall length for a starting load off that. So enough of that method. That's not the best one. It's not the worst one. There's other ways out there other than these three that we're talking about today. But that's something that I would use in conjunction with maybe our first method. That way you can compare and contrast the results that you're getting and determine your overall start length from there. But it is a tool we can use, and if you're limited on tools, then this is a great one to use. So one thing to mention though is we want to make sure that our bullet isn't sinking into the case when we're doing each of these little test rounds. So good practice is to measure your overall length right after you take it out of the chamber and see if there's any difference, and just keep track of that number down there. So I was doing that off camera. I didn't do it on camera, unfortunately, but it's just a habit, and you want to make sure that you're not pushing the bullet into the case when it's reaching the land. So keep that in mind and just go slow. As long as you have a good amount of neck tension on there, you shouldn't have any problems. The bullet will stick in there really, really well. I've only had one that's come out and it got stuck in the lands and grooves. It was a brand new 308 and had really, really sharp lands and grooves, and I pushed it in there way too far and it popped the bullet out. So no big deal, just get the bullet out and move on. So now we'll talk about method number 3, and this is the one that I use currently. I've used this one for a long time, and I found it to be the most accurate of all of these that we're talking about today. All right, here we go with method number 3. So this one requires a couple tools. This is the Sinclair seating depth gauge. Bought it from Brownells several years ago. Works really well. It's simple to use, very simple tool, and it gets great results. So I've never had any issues with it. Then we also need our calipers with the comparator insert, and we need a fired case that has not been sized at all. So I leave the primer in them, and we leave them as they came out of the rifle. And then we need the bullet that we're going to reload. All right, I'll just go over the tool real quick before we get started. The basis of the tool is just this stainless steel rod. It's about a foot long or so. It has the full diameter on one end and a reduced diameter on the other end. And I believe that so this reduced diameter can go into a large or small rifle primer pocket and use that as kind of an origin for the test. But for the most part, I use the big end because it sits nice and flush against the head of the case, and that's where we're going to be testing. So the way this works is we put a bullet in, just a single bullet with no cartridge. We allow it to rest in the forwardmost position when it's contacting the lands and grooves. Then we get a measurement off of the bow tail of the bullet, the flat base there, to a known distance in the back. So we'll set one of our little collars there, and then we move on to our case. And we'll do the same thing with the case. Knock the bullet out of there, seat the case, make sure it is seated all the way up against the shoulder. Then we'll measure off of the head of the case to our known dimension. So that gives us 2 different dimensions to measure. From there, we can take that dimension and add that to the dimension of the bullet ogive to the base, and that's going to give us a complete measurement, if we add all 3 of those together, of the measurement from the case head all the way up to the ogive of the bullet. All right, so I had to back us out a little bit so you can see this part, but what we're going to do here is we're going to start off the test by putting this bullet softly into the chamber and letting it rest against the lands. So some rifles, it's a trick to do this, but that one went right in. Then you want to look down the action and just make sure that you see the back of the bow tail and everything looks pretty centered up. So you don't want to jam it in there and let it drop super hard. So I try to just rest them in there, because that'll skew the results and give you an inaccurate measurement. So that's how we start it. Now I'll get you guys close and we'll take a look at how we start our measurements. All right, guys, so we'll take our rod here. We're going to put one of our collars on. And I usually put the small diameter to the back on the first one. And we take our little bolt handle thingamajigger here. And that goes on right behind it. So all we're doing is inserting the rod into the action, and you want to move this little Delrin spacer up there. And what I try to do is I use this little silver stud that comes out of the side of it, and I line it up with just about the midpoint of the receiver, so it gives you a good consistent place to go. And then all we're doing is slowly moving the rod forward until it contacts the back of the bullet. So right there we're good. I'll move my little collar up, and you just kind of hold pressure on it just a little tiny bit and slowly tighten the thumb screw. And that's it for our first measurement. So now I'll do it off camera so I don't have to move the camera back, but we got to get the bullet out of there. So there's a couple ways to do it. I really don't like putting cleaning rods down the muzzle of my rifle. So usually I'll use a 1 diameter bullet smaller and drop it down the bore, and that usually knocks the bullet loose, or you can just bounce it on the butt pad on the ground and not too hard, and that'll rattle the bullet loose as well. But either way, get it out of there, whichever method you prefer, and we'll check out the second part of this. All right, so the next step of this is we need to take our second collar and put it on, and I put it on so the smaller diameter is to the opposite end this time, so the camera will zoom on that or focus on it. So there we see the smaller diameters are opposing, they're not facing together. So that's how I set it up. You can do it opposite of that, but it makes measuring a little bit easier, as you'll see in a second. So then we also want to make sure that we put the Delrin slider in the same orientation as it was before, because that little stud's at a different dimension fore and aft. So it's not right in the middle, it's more towards this end with the smaller diameter on it. So I usually use this diameter here, the larger end of it. So what we need to do is slide that on our rod, and then we'll take our fired case that still has a primer in it, and we'll get that into the chamber. So we take our rod and same as before, slide it on in, and I'll find that midpoint roughly and keep pressure on it with my thumb, and then I just slowly move the tool forward. And you can kind of eyeball it and actually see the rod contacting the case head. So you want to make sure that the rod's right in the middle of the case head, and that'll give you a good reading. So we're there. Yep, pretty solid. So we'll tighten down our little collar here, and we'll take it out. All right, got our case out. We have our measurement here, so we'll do that in a second. But now, the last step of this process is we need to use our comparator here and get a measurement for a bullet. So we insert the bullet into the comparator insert and run the bottom of the calipers up against the base of the bullet, and we get looks like 715 thousandths, 0.715. So we'll record that here on the piece of paper. All right. Then the other dimension we need to check is we'll take our comparator off, re-zero the calipers. And then the beauty of having it done this way with these two smaller diameters on the outside is you can take your calipers and get your dimension just off of that. So very simple. I'm getting 1 inch, 435 thousandths. We'll write that down. So now I'll turn to my trusty calculator here and we'll add that up. So we got 0.715 plus 1.435. So that gives us 2 inch 150. All right. All right, and that is our dimension to the lands. So that's as accurate as you can get. That's as accurate as I know of a way to do this. I'm sure that there's other methods out there that are probably better or easier, but check this out. I'll write it up here so we can see it easier, but this is pretty interesting. So here we have method number 1 at 2 inch 1495. Method number 2, we overshot 2 inch 136. And method number 3, the most accurate method, at 2 inch 150. So we are a half of 1,000th of an inch off with this method right here, just pushing the bullet into the case. So pick your poison, whichever one you want to use, but that's a pretty darn accurate way of doing it in my opinion. So really interesting stuff. And that's the first time that I've actually compared all 3 methods to each other. And like I kind of mentioned before when we were going through the second method, I don't feel like that's a very accurate one. As you could tell, we were like 20 thousandths or so off of the other 2 dimensions, but it's a good starting place, and if it's all you have, go with it. All right, so we made it through all 3 of the methods to determine our jump distance. We talked about why it's important and what it can do for us. One thing we didn't talk about was other limitations to seating depth, the biggest one being the magazine that we're using. This is an accurate mag. I think I might have mentioned that before, but this is just a single stack 308 magazine. It's got a pretty generous overall length, but you are limited to this if you want to mag feed your bullets. And there's a lot of new bullets out there, especially like the 7mm and some of the larger 30 cal bullets that are very, very long for caliber. And it takes a special reamer or a special throating reamer to make those even work with the cartridge. So in most cases, you're not going to be able to mag load those. So you're going to single load them and shoot them that way. And if that's what you want to do, that's perfectly fine too, but that is a limitation. So if you're shooting PRS or some sporting events or even hunting, I usually try to keep my stuff within a magazine. So if that means going to a lighter bullet, then so be it. But I like my stuff magazine fed, and I will continue doing it that way. So hope you guys found that interesting. It's just one of the little tiny pieces of the reloading puzzle that we can control and we can understand. And this is one of those things that it's very nice to use for fine tuning. I've mentioned that a lot during this video, but really great for fine tuning. So there's a lot of times when you'll come up with a really nice load on an OCW test or a ladder test, and the accuracy just isn't what you want it to be. And a lot of times, following up with some seating depth tests will solve that problem and get you that more accurate load. A couple other things to mention before we wrap this up. As you fire rounds through your rifle barrel, it's going to have what's called throat erosion. So that point, the lead, is going to get pushed further forward every time. And that's just based on the pressure, the heat, and everything that happens when that round ignites and sends that bullet down the barrel. So it's different for every cartridge out there. The big overbore cartridges like the 300 Norma, the 300 Rum, all these big cartridges, some of the 7mm, they're pushing a lot of powder down that tiny little bore. Those are going to have throat erosion at a faster rate than something like a 223 or a 6BR or something like that. So what I say is to people who are competing or shooting a lot, if you start to see your accuracy fall off, maybe check where your jump is and see if something has eroded to the point where it's out of that little accuracy area that it wants to be in. So just something simple to check real quick, and it's something you should monitor throughout the life of the barrel. A lot of guys will actually use that as a marker to scrap the barrel. So it gets so long to a point that you can't keep seating your bullets too long enough. They won't fit in a magazine, so it's done. Throw it out, turn up a new one. So pretty interesting. And just to reiterate, all of these methods that we looked at today, they serve as a starting point. So that gives you the dimension at the lands. That's not always the best dimension to load to, especially for your first time load development. Typically, I'll set my bullet back from the lands 20,000ths of an inch, and I do that pretty much for all cartridges, calibers, bullets, everything. So that's just a good place to start. You can always go fore and aft, but that's a safe place to start as far as pressure goes. You can run into some pressure issues if you're pushing that bullet up against the lands and you kick off a hot load, you might have a problem. So 20 thou off is a good place to start, and just go ahead and make sure you guys are doing all your safe reloading practices. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I've had a lot of interaction with you guys lately on the company email. So head on over to the website, check it out. We got a bunch new shirts in, some new hats. There's a bunch of proof barrels in stock now, a bunch of Trigger Tech triggers. So we have a bunch of products we're starting to build up, and hopefully very soon we're going to start kicking out these awesome rifles. So thanks for watching, you guys. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.